Jeremy Corbyn, in 11 days' time, you might be Prime Minister. People are entitled to know about you, aren't they?
Yes.
Are you frustrated?
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Good. Are you frustrated that so many of your core ideas, your basic principles, didn't make it into this manifesto?
Oh, come on, this is a really good manifesto. I'm glad you got it, by the way. It's a really good...
I've had to read it too.
Well, I helped to write it.
Yeah, but it doesn't include key things that you believe in, does it?
This manifesto is a product of
Sure.
the views of the Labour Party,
You have spent
of party conference decisions and of the views put forward by individuals in the shadow cabinet. But this manifesto
you
fundamentally...
You persuade the cabinet, the shadow cabinet...
finish
to no.
Oh, come on.
Couldn't
come on, give us a chance.
Persuade the shadow cabinet to accept your basic principle, which you have adhered to for the whole of your adult life, that there should be nuclear disarmament. You promise in this to renew Trident.
There was a conference decision by the Labour Party, and as the leader of the party, I accept the democracy of our party. And
is that morally right?
In answer to the questions put earlier, I made the point that as Prime Minister, I will do all I can to bring about a nuclear-free world, because I'm horrified at the very idea, horrified at the very idea of a nuclear attack.
You promised to renew a nuclear weapon.
It's there in the programme.
Is that morally right?
Listen, it's there in our manifesto because our conference voted for it. I have to accept that decision.
Do you think it's morally right?
Can I finish? Can I finish? What I want to see...
I'm asking you
what I want to see...
Do you think it's morally right?
What I want to see is a nuclear-free world.
Of course, everybody wants to see that.
I'm not so sure about it. I'm not so sure about it.
If that's what you believe, is it morally right to renew a nuclear deterrent?
That is the decision that's been taken. We will work for a nuclear-free world. We will work through the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty to achieve that. That surely is something well worth doing.
A number of your other core beliefs do make it into this manifesto, don't they? About nationalising the Royal Mail, for example, or the railways, or energy companies, or water companies. Why not banks?
Well, some of our banks are publicly owned, as it is, actually.
You said you have always believed that banks should be publicly owned.
Wait. There are some banks that are publicly owned. We will be promoting building societies, cooperatives, and we will be promoting a national investment bank, which won't be a lending bank, it will be an investment bank.
No, you believe
and that is an important part of it.
Public ownership of retail banks.
An important part of directing investment in this country. Of the retail banks, RBS is largely publicly owned. There is a public stake in most of the other banks, and that we will keep.
I would always favour banks being in public ownership. You said that in 2013. Yes. You do.
Well, I did say that.
But it doesn't get into the manifesto, does it?
Jeremy, what we seem to be struggling with here is an understanding of a process that brings about a manifesto.
No. What we're struggling
I am not a dictator.
How much this represents what you believe.
I am not a dictator who writes things to tell people what to do. This is a product of a process in our party. That's why I was elected leader of our party, to give a voice to the members and those that are affiliated to our party.
All right, let's take another aspect of it. You say you'll freeze benefits for 3 years. You will?
No, what we've said is we will put £2 billion into the benefit system per year in order
That's tax credits.
In order to reduce the effects. We will also end the indignity of the...
Will you freeze benefits for 3 years then?
Benefits will be paid, of course. Benefits will be uprated.
Of course they'll be paid.
And will be uprated, of course. And there will be...
They won't be frozen.
And there will be a higher living wage, as I've outlined, which will, of course, mean that those benefits that are paid for people in work, and indeed the majority of benefits go to people in work, not out of work, will probably reduce.
I'm asking you whether they'll be frozen.
No, they're not going to be frozen because they'll be uprated every year, as they should be.
Thank you. What about money for the security services? How can we take that seriously when your shadow chancellor was photographed holding a letter which called for the abolition of MI5, the abolition of Special Branch and the disarming of the police?
We've made it very clear. We have made it very clear that we will provide more police. This government has taken 20,000 police officers off our streets.
But you don't deny that John McDonnell said all
We'll
that.
put 10,000 more on our streets. We've also said quite clearly
How can
that...
we believe that when the Shadow Chancellor believes in disbanding MI5
The Shadow
and
Chancellor,
the Special Branch?
the Shadow Chancellor is the one who signed off that pledge in the manifesto.
So he says one thing one day and one thing another day.
John McDonnell supports the need for more police officers. John McDonnell also accepts...
Does he still believe in abolishing MI5?
Also accepts the need for the accountability to Parliament of our security services, which is important, but he also accepts, as I do, the need to have security services that do protect us. Manchester is a good example, and I think when all the inquiries have been completed in Manchester, I think we need to look at those needs.
So he signs letters which call for the abolition of MI5 and Special Branch and the rest of it, but when it comes to the manifesto, he's perfectly happy to sign off on more police officers and doubtless more money for MI5.
What you're going to see with John McDonnell is a Chancellor that looks at the needs of the country, looks at the needs of the people of this country and invests in our future, not hands money away in tax relief to big corporations and at the top end of our society.
There is nothing in this manifesto about getting rid of the monarchy, which is another thing you believe in, isn't it? Look,
there's nothing in there because we're not going to do it.
But you do believe in it, don't you?
Listen, it's not on anybody's agenda. It's certainly not on my agenda. And do you know what? I had a very nice chat with the Queen.
But you don't like her, do you? You don't like what she represents?
We got along absolutely fine, perfectly charming. But I don't think she should be brought into political discussion.
Any human being anywhere can have a nice conversation with anybody, but you do not believe in the institution of monarchy, do you?
Look, I believe in a democracy, and we live in a democracy. We have a titular head of state as the monarch, but without political power.
When the Queen's reign comes to an end, should there be call stumps on the whole thing then? Call it a day.
Look, the law is there. And that's what will prevail. I'm fighting this election, Jeremy, on something very important. Yeah, that is the levels of poverty in our society, the levels of children that are not supported properly in our society. I'm fighting this election.
Reflects your beliefs.
Jeremy, I'm fighting this election on social justice. I'm fighting this election to give us a stronger economy for the future.
There's a whole series of things that you couldn't even persuade your own party to put in the manifesto that you believe in.
Jeremy, this manifesto reflects what would be a profound and very good change in our society. Because for the first time, you'd have a government that was saying, you cannot go on loading our students with debt. You cannot go on overcrowding our classrooms. You cannot go on underfunding our hospitals. You have to invest by all of us for the future of all of us. Sure. I don't want to live in a country of food banks. I don't want to live in a country of homeless people. I want to live in a country that actually does seriously care for all.
When you're Prime Minister, you will have to take this country into negotiations with the rest of Europe.
Yes.
When they look at you and they see a man who cannot get his core beliefs into his own manifesto, are they going to take you seriously?
Listen, what they're going to take very seriously is that we would have been elected with a mandate to negotiate a tariff-free trade access to the European market, that we will protect European nationals living here. What they will see is a government that is going to protect the protocols, environmental conditions, workers' rights that we achieved through Europe, and a government that wants a serious relationship with Europe, but respects the result of our referendum in that we're leaving the European Union.
You are prepared to contemplate, then, no deal?
There's going to be a deal.
There is going to be a deal. Would you leave Europe without a deal?
We will make sure there's a deal. And you know what? We won't
How much of our money are you prepared to give Brussels?
We won't start the negotiations by megaphone diplomacy and threatening Europe with some kind of offshore tax haven on the shores of Europe. We'll start those negotiations seriously with respect to them.
How much money are you prepared to give to Brussels in order to get a deal?
Jeremy, there are going to be negotiations over all of that. I've seen the figures that Michel Barnier has bandied around. I don't recognise those figures, others may not also, we will obviously negotiate. And where we have a legal obligation, it must be met. Where the EU has a legal obligation, it must be met. But we have to recognise...
So you've done some sums?
We have to recognise...
You've done some sums, haven't you?
We have to recognise...
You know how many billions it is.
We have to recognise we're leaving the European Union. The priority has to be tariff-free trade access, because we have a lot of manufacturing industry...
Haven't you done any sums?
Can I finish, please? Really? Just for a second?
No, I'm asking you for a figure.
Trying to explain...
How much are you prepared to give to get a deal?
Jeremy, I'm trying to explain the basis on which we propose to negotiate.
And I'm asking you a very simple question. How much are you prepared to pay to get a deal?
There is no answer to your question, because nobody could answer it at this stage.
You don't know.
I've said what we would do is pay that we are legally required to do. There will have to be an agreement on trade access. Now, it's not a one-way street, because all of our manufacturing industry relies on supply chains across Europe, as indeed many European manufacturers supply supply chains from this side of the Channel as well.
Would a Corbyn Brexit mean lower immigration to this country from outside the EU?
We had that discussion with the audience earlier on. Free movement...
You said probably.
Free movement ends when we leave the European Union. We will, as I've said...
So you're not giving any guarantee on immigration?
I've said we'll protect the rights of EU nationals here, and we want the same for British nationals across Europe, because these are people, their families...
I'm asking you about immigration.
Yeah, and we will stop the undercutting that goes on by importation of low-paid workers. There will be migration of managed... necessary to sustain our economy. I'm not going to sit here and make promises. Theresa May has done that for the third election running and hasn't got anywhere near meeting her promises in the last two.
So you're not making any promise about whether you would reduce immigration?
I suspect it would probably be slightly less or less,
probably.
But
probably is hardly a commitment, is it?
Nobody...
Do you think there are too many immigrants in this country?
Listen, we require migrant workers to maintain our health service and much of our industry. We have a skills gap because we haven't invested enough in skill training.
Let's look at the security of the state then. The primary duty of a Prime Minister, the overwhelming duty, is the protection of the state. And yet the only time in recent history that there has been an invasion of British soil was the invasion of the Falklands. And you recall what you said then, well, don't you? I
wanted there to be a UN-brokered plan of a ceasefire at that time, which President Terry of Peru was trying to pursue.
You said that young, unemployed men were being sent to the South Atlantic to die in pursuit of a Tory plot.
What I wanted was a stopping of that war. I didn't want any young men, British or Argentinian or anybody else, to die in that war. And as...
Did you not think the Argentines should have got out of the Falklands?
I don't think they should have gone in there, but I also think there should have been an opportunity to prevent that war happening by the UN, which was being attempted at that time.
So you do think it was a Tory plot, do you?
No, I think it was important.
Why did you say so then?
I think it was important that there should be a negotiated solution to that through the United Nations. That surely...
If you didn't believe it was a Tory plot,
Jeremy,
why did you say you thought it was?
Jeremy, Margaret Thatcher made a great deal of the whole issue, as everybody could see at the time. I felt that she was exploiting the situation, but there has to be, at the end of every conflict, there has to be a peace process. So why don't we start with the objective of trying to get a peace process?
Looking back on it, you realise you were wrong,
use our councils through the United Nations to achieve
because
that.
It's quite possible that in a couple of weeks' time, if you're sitting in Downing Street, the Chief of the Defence Staff could come to you and say, we have eyes on a man in Iraq or in Syria or in Afghanistan who is plotting a bombing campaign in Britain. You have 20 minutes to make up your mind as to whether we take him out with a drone strike. Now, if you think... Do you think that's a Tory plot as well?
I would want to know the circumstances, the evidence, and what would happen...
It's happened before.
And also what the effect of it would be on innocent civilians around, because...
You would be prepared to take such a decision,
listen,
would you? You would be prepared to take such a decision.
Taking somebody, killing somebody actually happened outside Parliament, what, a month ago, didn't it?
Yes.
And I think you have to look at all the evidence that's there. But you can't answer a hypothetical question without the evidence around it.
But it's not really hypothetical.
It's a completely hypothetical
with David
question.
Cameron and Jihadi John.
It's a completely hypothetical question. We have to look at the evidence that's there
You
at the
would
time.
be prepared
We have to look at the evidence that's there at the time to make that fatal decision one way or the other.
Why did you describe the killing of Osama bin Laden as a tragedy?
Because I think he should have been arrested and I think he should have been put on trial. And he could have been.
Do you think that was a tragedy?
I think the whole Afghan experience is a tragedy, and I think he should have been put on trial.
See, what bothers a lot of people is the friends that you have made in your campaign, doubtless heartfully felt for peace. Like Hamas, for example. You know that Hamas have killed civilians, and yet you call them your friends.
It was inclusive language at a meeting in which I was promoting the idea of a two-state solution, in which I was promoting the need for dialogue between Israel and all aspects of Palestine, including Hamas, as well as including Fatah. I think to bring about a peace process, that is important. Do you know what happened last night in Tel Aviv? There was a very large demonstration of people wanting a peace process and a dialogue. I think those are people you've got to work with. You've got to work with people often you don't agree with and don't like.
You're happy to call Hamas your friends, despite the fact they killed innocent women and children.
It was an inclusive piece of language in order to get a meeting underway. I do not agree with them. I do not support them. I want there to be a process. But at the end of the day, there has to be a process in which people talk to each other. You know that.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you. Theresa May, when did you realise that you'd got the wrong answer to the biggest question of our times in politics?
Well, I'm tempted to ask you, Jeremy, what you think. Do you mean you're talking about Brexit?
Well, of course.
Right. Well, there are lots of challenges in our politics at the moment. There are lots of challenges that the government face.
I'm just curious, what was it convinced you that Brexit was so bad for Britain?
I set out my reasons for deciding that we should, on balance, stay within the European Union. I voted to remain, I campaigned to remain.
And when did you change your mind?
The British people were given the choice, and the British people decided that they wanted the United Kingdom to leave the European Union.
So you're now stuck with trying to deliver something you believe is bad for this country?
I'm delivering what I believe the British people want their government to deliver. And I think it's very important. I think it's not just an issue about Brexit itself. It's actually an issue, to me, about trust in politicians.
Hang on a second. You said in March last year that we would be more secure, more prosperous and more influential, virtually in those words, if we stayed in the European Union. And now you want to take us out of it.
And I also said that the sky wouldn't fall in if we left the European Union.
So you have changed your mind, have you?
We gave people the choice.
You've changed your mind?
I'll answer that in a minute. We gave people the choice, Jeremy, and the British people decided to leave the European Union. Yeah. And I think it's important for them to see their politicians delivering on that choice and respecting the will of the people. And what I think's...
Sure, OK. So you've changed your mind?
What I am now doing is...
Have you changed your mind?
I think there are huge opportunities for Brexit.
Have you changed your mind?
Jeremy, I know that you have used this tactic and you want...
I'm just trying to get an answer.
Yes,
that's all. You can say yes or no. I haven't changed my mind. Yes, I have changed my mind. Say what you like.
I take the view that we can make a success of Brexit. I take the view that the British people want us to make that success. Of course, Jeremy, as Prime Minister, I've been out there already ensuring that the negotiations are going to start, and I want to ensure that there's a strong hand in those negotiations. I believe in making a success of Brexit for the whole of the United Kingdom.
But you don't really believe in it, do you?
I believe in making a success of Brexit.
Let me look at it another way. How was it that people like Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, David Davis, Priti Patel, even Andrea Leadsom, they all got it right and you got it wrong?
voted. Well, there's no gainsaying the fact that I campaigned to remain and voted to remain.
Sure,
but I
you
also
still think it's a duff idea.
I said it was a balanced. Sorry.
You still think it's a duff idea,
No,
don't you?
No, I think that.
You haven't changed your mind.
Look, the referendum drew a line under those debates. What the referendum did was took the view of the British people. Now, I think it's right that we do that now. And I genuinely think that if we get Brexit right, and this is really important for us, if we get Brexit right, we can make a real success of the opportunities that open up for us. But we can only do that if we grasp those opportunities.
But you still think it's a bad idea?
No, I believe we're doing the right thing in making a success of Brexit.
Well, of course you want to make a success of it. Can we look at something else that you've changed your mind on, or perhaps not changed your mind on? Social care. Now, you had a manifesto commitment which said there would be a cap on the cost of social care. Then your latest manifesto dropped that. And for clarification, the Health Secretary said there will be no cap. And 4 days later, you said there will be a cap.
We had what Jeremy Hunt was talking about and what we referred to in our manifesto was the specific proposal. This proposal was put forward by Andrew Dilnot a few years ago when he was asked by government to look at the social care issue. And if I just explain why we rejected that Dilnot proposal, Jeremy, it was because, for two reasons. First of all, because it was going to be paid for out of general taxation. And secondly, because that Dilnot proposal protected wealthier pensioners but did nothing to protect pensioners on modest incomes. Now, the proposals I've put forward actually do that. They do help pensioners on modest incomes. And crucially, they ensure we have a long-term, sustainable solution for social care.
OK, you have said earlier that it's very important that people can trust their politicians and their governments. Can I ask you, explicitly, unambiguously, what will the cap be?
Well, as I've just answered, I'm not going to give you a different answer from the one I've given Faisal. No, it's not about not knowing, Jeremy. It's about thinking what...
You don't know, do you?
It's about thinking what the right approach is to get to that figure.
But you don't know.
What we want to do is to ask, is to consult, is to listen, and then to determine what that cut will be.
Have you even thought what the cost of the taxpayer will be?
I think that's only fair to people, that we actually go through that consultation and say to people and take people's views as we determine that cap.
Just at a philosophical level, you said you went into politics to help the just about managing. How is enabling rich people to pass on wealth to the next generation helping the just about managing?
What is helping is ensuring that we don't have a long-term solution for our social...
No, my question was how it helped the just about managing.
And I'm answering your question,
You're not.
Jeremy. You have asked me about the just about managing and how they're being helped. And what I'm going to point out is that if you have a social care system which relies on taxing those just about managing at higher levels, that's not helping them. What we're doing is putting forward a proposal which means that people don't have to sell their house in their lifetime to pay for care. It means they can pass on savings to their children, and it means there will be that cap. But it's fair across the generations. And there are older people today who worry that their children and grandchildren won't have a better future.
Can we look at something else on which you've changed your mind? Only this March, in the budget, you proposed to increase national insurance contributions from the self-employed. Within a week, you'd back down from that. You accept that?
Yes, I accept that. And we very clearly stated at the time...
You see, what one's bound to say is, if I was sitting in Brussels and I was looking at you as the person I had to negotiate with, I'd think, she's a blowhard who collapses at the first sign of gunfire. Isn't that right?
I think, Jeremy, you'll find that what the people in Brussels look at is the record that I had of negotiating with them in Brussels and delivering for this country on a number of issues on Justice and Home Affairs, which people said we were never going to get.
All right.
And I got those negotiations.
Can you remind us how many times you told us after you became Prime Minister that there would not be a general election until 2020? You did, didn't you? I mean, I got to a grand total of 6 times on which you or your spokesman said there wouldn't be one.
And I said there wouldn't be a general election. And after I became Prime Minister, I felt that the most important thing for the country was the stability and getting on with triggering the Article 50 so that we made sure that we were delivering on that vote on Brexit. What became clear when we were going through that process is that other parties want to frustrate that process of those Brexit negotiations. We have the Liberal Democrats wanting a second referendum.
That's all happened since March, has it?
We have well, actually, it was March. It was in March that I triggered Article 50 by writing the letter to the
It was in March.
European Council.
Told us we didn't need to have a general election because it would destabilise the country until 2020.
And what became clear as we were looking through those negotiations, as they started those negotiations started the process of triggering them, what became clear, increasingly clear, as is clear in this election campaign, is the desire of other parties to frustrate the will of the British people. That's why I thought it was right to go out for an election.
Prime Minister, are you somebody who takes responsibility for their mistakes?
I take responsibility for the decisions I make, Jeremy.
Right. So you have been how many years in government now?
In government?
Yes.
I've been in government since 2010, so 7 years in government.
7 years in government, and you'll recall the manifesto promises on immigration.
Indeed I do.
That you'd bring it, you repeated them, in fact, in this manifesto.
Yes.
Said the same thing again because you failed. In your capacity, 6 of those 7 years, you were Home Secretary, weren't you?
I was indeed.
Yeah. Immigration was your main task, to get it down to what you promised in the manifesto, which was 100,000 or less non-EU immigrants per year net. You didn't do that, did you?
Net migration, no, we didn't achieve that. We did, what happened...
Can you just tell us what it is now?
Yes, it was 248,000 in the last set of figures. What we saw was the figures
migrants?
coming... Sorry?
Non-EU migrants?
Was about 175,000.
It's 175,000 according to the latest figures, yes.
What we saw in immigration figures was it started to come down, then they did go up, and now they're starting to come down again. What we will have when we leave the EU...
That was your job.
Is the... Yes. Jeremy, I'm not sitting here saying it wasn't. I'm accepting that what we had to do was to ensure that we were rooting out abuse in the system. But there is no single moment where you take one measure which changes the immigration figures. It is a constant work to ensure that you're dealing with immigration and ensuring there is no more abuse in the system. There's more work to be done. We will, of course, have another tool to do this when we leave the European Union, because we'll be able to introduce rules for people coming from within the European Union. But this will be a constant work.
Who won't be able to come to this country under your new rules?
Well, we're working at the moment on what those new rules should be in terms of...
So you still don't have any idea?
But no, it's not about... We have a set of rules for people from outside the European Union. We will look at the requirements for... One of the things we do is ensure that it's possible for people to be brought in where there are skill shortages, where there is a need for people to come to work.
And what's the damage going to be to the economy? Have you worked that out?
I think one of the crucial things we need to do in this country is ensure that actually we are enabling people here in the UK to be skilled up to do jobs. I think sometimes what we've seen is people being brought in from overseas because we haven't done sufficient in this country. That's why I think
your friend George Osborne, or your friend until you sacked him, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, says this policy is economically illiterate.
It's a policy which will actually...
Well, he should know, shouldn't he?
It's a policy which ensures that we are recognising the concerns that people in this country have about uncontrolled immigration. Controlling immigration is important. Right. It's important for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons it's important is because uncontrolled migration has an impact on wages at the lower end of the income scale.
Yeah.
People feel an impact from that. That's why I think it's so important that we keep working at this and we keep.
And you say it's much easier. It'll be much easier once we've left the European Union, won't it?
We will be able to introduce rules for people coming from within the European Union once we've left. That's been a piece of the work on immigration.
How much of our money are you prepared to give Brussels in order to get a deal?
I don't think it's going to be about paying over money to get a deal. What I think is important
You're
is
not
that
prepared to pay anything. I mean, David said he'd walk away at 100,000. 100 billion, sorry.
We've made clear, I've put it in the manifesto, that we will look for a fair...
Would you pay 100 billion to leave the European Union?
That we will put a fair settlement, look for a fair settlement of our rights and obligations. There are a number of figures that are being quoted and being around, a number of them coming from
Have you got any figure in your head?
Union, a number coming from the European Union itself. We will look at our rights and obligations.
Have you got a figure in your head as to how much it's worth paying to get out of this club?
It isn't a question of what it's worth paying to get out. It's a question of what is going to be the right deal for us to leaving the European Union, which will stop us from paying huge sums of money into the EU every single year, which will enable that we have control of our money and our borders and our laws.
But you wouldn't walk out, as David Davis says he would, if there was a request for 100 billion. You wouldn't walk out there.
We will be there to negotiate the right deal, but what I have said is no deal is better than a bad deal. We have to be prepared to walk out.
So you are prepared to walk away from the European Union with no deal?
No deal is better than a bad deal. And let me just tell you...
That wasn't exactly my question.
Yes.
My question was, are you prepared to walk away...
By definition, if I'm prepared to say that no deal is better than a bad deal, I want to get a good deal from the European Union. What I don't want is the sort of bad deal that some people are talking about. If you think about it, some people in Europe are talking about punishing us, and that would be a bad deal for us. Some people here in the UK talk as if they're willing to do anything to sign up to a deal with the European Union, and that would be a bad deal for us as well.
So
we need to negotiate and negotiate hard.
to leave the European Union with no deal?
As I say, no deal would be better than a bad deal.
You are prepared to leave the European Union with no deal?
I think you can take it, Jeremy. No deal would be better than a bad deal.
Yes, you said that repeatedly.
Yes. I'm not prepared to sign up to a bad deal for the UK. Now, I believe...
So you are prepared to walk away?
I think you have to. In negotiations, you have to recognise that you're prepared, that you're not in there to get a deal at any price. We're in there to get the best deal for the United Kingdom. And actually, I'm optimistic about that, because I think that in the European Union, they will want to continue their relationship with us as well.
You can be as optimistic as you like, but you might have to walk away from it.
What I will be doing is, as we heard in the earlier session, what I'll be doing is being a difficult woman and ensuring that we're negotiating hard. But
Theresa May, thank you very much. Thank you.